This is the Decision Point with Anand and Dury. Anand, we're chilling out. We got our hats on. I got the defunct Mikey Knife Fight hat. You got a Ohio State training camp hat on. You're about to go to the FF Expo in Canton, meet all of our good friends in the fantasy football industry. Today, we talk more about team structure, real NFL, with some fantasy implications. And today, covering the NFC East. It seems straightforward at first glance, but maybe not so much.
I think when you look at the NFC East, right, and I'm sure we'll get into discussions with people in Canton, so shouts to all my people going. But it looks straightforward, and we do this every year. There's a division where there's a team that came out of the pack and established themselves as a dominant team. We watched the Titans do this a couple of years back in the AFC. Mm-hmm. And then everybody starts pouring everything into this is a super team. They're going to be a dynasty. There's, and we think that the Eagles are really, really good. But writing off the Cowboys and the Giants for no reason seems foolish. Like, these are not bad teams. Going into last year, we thought they might be. We kind of thought that this division might be the Eagles and the Cowboys and that the Giants and Commanders would be yikes. But I was talking to my buddy Tej the other day, and, we were discussing last year's Giants. It felt like Daboll was playing poker with Uno cards. I mean, he had Daniel Jones and Saquon and not a lot else. The wide receivers out there were bad. We're going to get into the Commanders ownership sale. There's finally hope there. Thank fucking God Dan Snyder's gone. And then you've got the Eagles and the Cowboys who are firmly in that can win the NFC bubble. This division is not what these win totals would suggest it is at all. And we found that out last year. They were all close to the pack except for the Eagles. This division produced 3 playoff teams last year. And all 3 of those teams got better, as did the Commanders. This is going to be a knife fight all the way to the end. It's going to be a war of attrition. Eagles, Cowboys, and yes, the Giants may have something to say about that too. I think the Commanders are probably going to be a thorn in the side of a lot of these teams and a lot of playoff teams because they play a very unique brand of football that you just don't see super often. But this is not the redheaded stepchild division anymore. And I got to tell you, it seems easy to just sit here and say, oh, the Eagles are going to run away with it. I don't think they will.
Well, the NFC East odds on BetMGM. BetMGM is our preferred betting platform. BetMGM, the promo code is Underworld. The promo code is Underworld on BetMGM. You get $1,000 in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win on BetMGM, promo code Underworld. 7.5 to 1 for the Giants to win the NFC East. The Eagles are minus 110. The Cowboys are plus 170. And the Commanders are 10 to 1. So what you're saying here is that the best value is Giants to win the NFC East. So let's start with the Giants. I love what they're doing. My favorite thing about what the Giants do in the last 3 or 4 years, everyone that watches this show knows exactly what I'm about to say. They know, you could telegraph this from space. You know what I'm about to say. You know exactly what I'm going to say. One of their first 2 picks in the NFL draft was used on what general position?
Offensive line.
Offensive line. One of my favorite picks in the second round, John Michael Schmitz. You get a center named John Michael Schmitz from Minnesota or Wisconsin or Iowa, Nebraska, named John Michael Schmitz, a corn-fed, 300-pound center. That guy is a great investment, right?
It seems like every one of those guys works out.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's a name thing. I don't know if it's a school thing. I don't know if it's you're a center thing or you're a guard thing, but those guys all seem to work out. And that's not analytics by any means, but sometimes you just know.
Yeah, Tyler
And
Lindenbaum.
with
That's his best comparable
yeah,
on player profile. It's
yeah,
perfect. It's just perfect.
yeah.
Yes, he's the next Tyler Lindenbaum. Exactly. That's what he is.
And, when you look at how the Giants built out this roster, one of the things that kind of goes under the radar about roster building, and we haven't touched too much on this yet, but we'll get into it here, because the Eagles and the Cowboys are in a unique situation where when Philly paid Wentz, and then obviously now they're going to pay Jalen, and the Cowboys paid Dak, everybody wants to talk about the guys 2 through 24. The guys that you keep watching every week that are projected starters on your roster and how that impacts them. What really doesn't get talked about is the depth from 25 to 53 that you sometimes lose out on because you've paid big money to quarterback and running back. The Giants haven't had to pay their running back or their quarterback much to this point, so their roster depth, because of the players that they've been adding as free agents, the little guys, the guys that the micro transactions, the one that come across the waiver wire and you're like, why the hell did the Green Bay Packers let this guy go? And why did the Bears sign Mercedes Lewis? Well, the reason is because at some point you're going to need a third tight end. It doesn't seem important now, but one of your top two tight ends gets hurt. If you want to run two tight end sets and you don't trust your third tight end to be out there, you're handicapped in terms of what you can call. And Daboll's brilliance last year was he said, screw it. We'll do whatever we want with whatever we've got, and we'll figure it out. Now he's got legitimate pieces in Waller. Their receiver room is way better than it was last year.
It's still worse than most teams.
It's
still very bad. It's a bad receiver room. Okay, anytime you're starting Isaiah Hodgins and Darius Slayton, and you're hoping, you're banking on Jalen Hyatt, right? A slower than you would like stretch Z from Tennessee, that the third round pick. He looks like an NFL bust, but I understand why they drafted him. I think that Paris Campbell's going to outproduce Jalen Hyatt this year. Paris Campbell was a steal in free agency, getting him for $5 million. And they're only paying Daniel Jones $20 million this year. Now, the cap hit jumps from $21.7 million to $45 million next year. So they know that they can restructure that Daniel Jones contract because they have an out in 2025.
So the way that they've built this roster is basically, if anyone out there's watched Pac-12 football, it's kind of the Utah model, which is we're just going to get a bunch of really angry dudes in the trenches and play what Nick Saban would refer to as violent murder ball, which is we're going to run right at you again and again and again, and we're going to dare you to do the same to us because you can't.
I mean, they invested in the outside. They have two of the best tackles in the sport. We could look up, and they have the best tackle tandem in the NFL. Okay,
and that matters. Yeah. That matters way more than people are considering because of the caliber of edge rushers in this division. I mean, Washington alone, edge rushers galore. And then we know what the Eagles and the Cowboys have at edge rusher. So especially for a guy like Daniel that can move, and a guy like Saquon that can find holes where you need him to find holes. If you can just stalemate at tackle these crazy edge rushers that are in this division, you're going to give yourself a puncher's chance. And they did it last year. This team is better than last year's team in basically every discernible way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And last year's team was winning games against teams they had no business being in competition with.
No.
And if you look 1 year into the future, obviously they're going to be paying Daniel. But this is how you can take a quarterback that might not have value to other teams and maximize their strengths. We think this year, one of the reasons we're both in on Kenny Pickett at ADP is they're going to let him go. No matter what, he's not going to lose his job. Kenny Pickett is going to be put in a position where whatever he can do well, he's going to be asked to do. And he has capability outside of structure to run and pick up a few first downs and run into the end zone a couple of times. All of that has
more than a couple.
More than a couple. And that has massive fantasy value because if you consider this, the Giants don't want to have to run Daniel Jones as much as they ran him last year, but he's capable of doing it. The Bears don't want to run Justin Fields as much as they ran him last year, but he's capable of doing it. Same with
Justin Fields is going to have to do it. Daniel Jones doesn't have to do it because of this offensive line that they've compiled. It's actually incredibly impressive, and it goes to show how well this team does self-scouting, where Daniel Jones was an overcooked turkey 3 years ago, right? It was like, this guy's done in the league. We've given him a chance. He's had a few years. We've evaluated him. He's a total bust. Dave Gettleman, bad pick, right? But when you actually take a step back and you ask the question, has this quarterback received a fair evaluation? The answer is no, because he had no time to throw. They weren't investing in the offensive line. They were drafting a running back in the top 5. And when you do that, you can't invest the necessary capital in the offensive line. When the front office turned over and Dave Gettleman was jettisoned, there was a complete 180-degree shift in the mentality. They started doing exactly what I believe you need to do to build a winning franchise from the ground up, and that's from the middle out. They started building it from the middle out. They started with all these investments along the offensive line, and you'll notice they haven't gotten out over their skis with skill position players. They refuse to extend Barkley. Smart. They refuse to overpay for a wide receiver in free agency. Smart. Smart. They know they can sustain drives with that offensive line, and so what they're doing, they're drafting John Michael Schmitz. They're signing Wyatt Davis. They're like, hey, you got this big, hulking, mean, nasty guard, and you want to make him available? We'll grab him. You want to make Darren Waller available? One of the better two-way tight ends in the league? Yeah, absolutely. He's super versatile. He can play X. He can play in line. He can play in the slot. Bring him to our way. You want to have a Paris Campbell, one of the most versatile, explosive playmakers at the wide receiver position, available for $5 million? Where are your Huckleberry, right? And you look at the defense. I mean, talk about edge rushers. A lot of the best edge rushers are on this team. Kayvon Thibodeau has had a quiet offseason. This is exactly what you wanted from Kayvon Thibodeau. Nothing. You want to hear a thing. Right, you just want to hear that he's working hard. Ojulari, Leonard Williams, and then their first-round pick was a corner. They addressed a need in the late first round. And in the late first round, one of the best positions where you get the most bang for your buck, one of the best value positions to go for in the late first round is cornerback. And they got Deonte Banks, who fell to them. And it's just been a clinic in roster construction and the ability to have success even if you don't have one of these video game quarterbacks at the helm. If you surround him, especially with one of the best offensive lines in the sport, this team is going to be a winning team, and this team is dangerous. This team is dangerous. All that is preventing them from winning this division is that there's just too many elite playmakers on the Cowboys and on the Eagles. They just can't compete with the playmakers. But if there's injuries to CeeDee Lamb, if there's an injury to A.J. Brown, right, if there's injuries on the offensive line, which happens almost every year, it feels like Dallas has a litany of injuries along their offensive line. If either the Philadelphia Eagles or the Dallas Cowboys experience significant offensive line injuries or injuries to their skill position players, the Giants are going to come right in and fill that void.
I think if you simulate one of the things we've talked about on here, if you simulate this division 8 times in 2023, you don't think the Giants get one? That's what you're betting on. Basically, that if we simulated this division 8 times, that they win one. And I think they do. I think it's the perception of this team and what they did last year is very different than the reality of what they actually did last year, which is they won games with one arm tied behind their back. And that arm two is not fully free yet. It's not like they have, CD Lamb out there or Amon-Ra St. Brown. Nobody's accusing them of that. But they have more than they had last year. And last year they made it work in a division that is every bit as tough, with the same quarterback, with the same running back, with the same head coach and offensive coordinator. Do not be surprised if the New York Giants beat a team that you consider a Super Bowl contender, and don't be surprised if they do it in a manner that you're not expecting. Because the way that they play football, if they get a lead, they can bleed the life out of you. And there aren't a whole lot of teams. You watch the Eagles do it last year, where they would get a 14-point lead, and you'd see A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert do crazy things. And then they would just bludgeon you to death. And the Giants are now capable of that. Do I think that they're last year's Eagles? No, I don't. But injuries are a big part of the sport, and you have to account for that in the number that you hang. And plus 750 is just too much for a team that is right there, that can play on the offensive and defensive lines with any of these teams. And that's half the battle in and of itself. Now, I'm not suggesting Daniel Jones is going to go out there and outperform Jalen Hurts. But if a couple of things break his way, he doesn't have to. It's just, again, this division is going to be a war of attrition. And at the end, someone is going to be left standing. And I think more than 1 out of 8, it's going to be the Giants.
So Daniel Jones is comparable to Kenny Pickett. Kenny Pickett is comparable to Daniel Jones. These are just similar quarterbacks, similar college resumes, similar physical profiles, similar play styles, right? And Kenny Pickett is 50-1 to win the MVP. Daniel Jones on BetMGM, promo code Underworld, Daniel Jones is actually 80-1 on BetMGM. It's the best odds you're going to get. When you're looking at a book arbitrage, the best MVP odds on Daniel Jones, 80-1. Like, those are better odds than what they're giving Mac Jones, right? Those are better odds than what they're giving Matthew Stafford. Certainly, like I said, better than Jordan Love, Kirk Cousins, Kenny Pickett. And he is actually set up for success. And on a team where if the Giants can somehow do this and win this division against the odds, like you said, 7-1, 8-1, then he is going to win MVP, right? He may not necessarily have the most impressive stat line, but if the team, supported by the team, this incredible offensive line and defensive line, if he is at the helm of this organization that, again, surprises everyone in the NFL and wins this division, that's a good bet. 80-1 is good value. 7-1 to win the division is good value on the Giants. I like betting the Giants in the futures market.
Because I mean, the win total market at 7.5 is, to me, an easy over. Like that's one of the ones that sticks out to me as, I don't know that you know what you're looking at here. Because to have the Eagles at 11.5, the Cowboys at 9.5, the Giants at 7.5, and the Commanders at 6.5, there's more that separates the Giants roster from Washington's, especially at the positions that matter. But again, really tough division. Everyone's going to be in every game. These teams are not as far apart as that win total market would suggest, but someone's got to lose these games, and they're giving Philly and Dallas the benefit of the doubt, as they should. They've done it before, and the other two have not. It's a tough sell. It's not hard to see a market where the Giants and the Eagles, or the Giants, Cowboys, and Eagles all go to the playoffs again, because the NFC just doesn't have the depth elsewhere to really push many of them, it's probably going to be a similar grouping of teams to what we had last year. And to watch the Giants win 9 games with that roster last year and then go to 7.5 in the win total market, it's just wrong. That's
No,
the wrong
they
number.
got better. How, man? They got better. And yet the lines only. So I love Giants over 7.5. Just to look at the over-under win totals. Giants are 22-1 to win the NFC. This is a weak division. That may be my favorite bet of all. I may like that bet even more than just winning the NFC East.
I think it's more likely than 22-1 that they win the NFC, especially if the Saints are getting 12-1. The Giants are a better team right now than the Saints. At least I think so.
Yeah.
Especially given the youth
by a lot.
the youth on their roster and kind of how they're going about things. But if you're like, again, futures markets are about numbers. They're not about teams necessarily. And they're about finding value in odds. There's no value in betting the Saints at 12-1. There's a lot of value in betting the Giants at 22-1, because if they did win the division, that means that 2 of their obstacles are either out of their way and suffered injury in terms of the Cowboys and the Eagles. Those are 2 of the premier teams in the NFC, period. So if they get through their division, the major dominoes left for them are the Lions, the Niners, the Seahawks. That's what you're looking at. And I'm not entirely sure what you do with that info, but if they get out of that division as the division winner, which we think is more likely than 8-1, they're going to get a home playoff game against somebody. It's probably either going to be the Seahawks or the Niners, whichever team doesn't win that division. And if they can get through that game, they're basically looking at the other and the Lions, and there's a chance that those 2 teams have to play each other. This could all come down to the Cowboys and the Eagles fall apart health-wise, which has happened to both teams before and may very well happen again. And then you're looking at a path for the Giants where it's very San Francisco early Shanahan-ish, where they're just going to run the air out of the ball for 45 minutes a game, time of possession. Like, if you remember the NFC Championship game where I think Garoppolo attempted like 7 passes or something crazy like that, and they just ran Green Bay out of town, that's the Giants' formula. Can they put it all together to get there? I'm not sure, but there is a path for them to do it, which is crazy because if we had the same conversation a year ago, it seemed like they were much farther away than they were. And Daboll deserves a lot of credit for a lot of that because Daniel Jones was a known quantity. Fortunately or unfortunately, Daniel Jones was a known quantity, and that known quantity was a bust of catastrophic proportions, given what else you could have drafted there. And he's resurrected this kid's career and turned him into what we thought he could be coming out.
Yeah. This is exactly what he was projected to be coming out of Duke.
And we thought that he could be that, but we never thought that it would take 3 or 4 years of absolute trial by fire for him to get there. But it just goes to show you, sometimes it's just a coach thing. You know, you hire the right guy and somebody you thought nothing of suddenly turns into something. Brian Daboll and Mike Kafka deserve a lot of credit for what's going on there.
Yeah, I mean, they do play the Eagles in week 16 and week 18. So they're setting up the Giants to have this, East Coast, NFC East grudge match late in the season, week 16, week 18. So I'll be tuned in for that for sure. Look at the Washington Commanders. This is a team that is going to be losing a lot. They're in division with the Giants and the Eagles and the Cowboys. It's a very problematic schedule, which is part of the reason why the futures market is so bearish on Washington. I just think it makes sense, right? Their win total is 6.5, and it's hard to find 7 wins on this schedule. It's really, really hard, damn near impossible. they're going to be throwing a lot. That is the one silver lining for fantasy football, is because they're going to be losing so much, they're going to be close to the leader in the NFL in total plays. You go to our draft kit, their total plays are projected to be over 1,000, which is one of the highest percentiles among NFL teams. They're just going to have to throw and throw and throw to stay in games. And by the way, you can get a draft kit for life. I'm looking up all this information that I talk about on the Decision Point show. When I talk about teams and I talk about their depth charts and I talk about their schedules, I am looking at the team insights from our world famous draft kit. From the Giants to the Eagles to the Cowboys, it's all right there in front of me. Vacated targets, vacated carries, vacated air yards, strength of schedule information. And that this passing game is clearly an opportunity in fantasy football for value. You look at the ADP on Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Curtis Samuel in particular, and the running back that's going to catch the most passes, my favorite offensive skill position player on this team, especially at cost in fantasy football, Antonio Gibson. I think that is the focus. If you're going to go with a wild card underdog to win this division, to make a run, I think it's the Giants. I don't think it's Washington. I think they are not nearly as well constructed as New York. It's likely a stay away, looking at a lot of these different futures bets. If anything, I would go under, just because I think it's going to be one of those situations where it eventually falls to Jacoby Brissett. They're going to be airing it out a lot, but they're going to be losing a lot. I mean, look at the schedule. They get the Cardinals, right? But they cross against the AFC East. The AFC East is one of the strongest divisions in the NFL. And then after they face the Cardinals, it just becomes completely brutal, where they're at the Broncos, they get Buffalo, they get Philadelphia, and then on down the board, there are very few easy matchups. They close it out at the Jets, San Francisco, and Dallas. Just to put it's just not good, man.
Tough, man.
It's not good. I'm seeing Cardinals with Colt McCoy. There's a win for Washington. Certainly they're going to win a couple games in the NFC East, and then it's very difficult to find a win.
The funniest part to me about all this is, like you rattle off schedule stuff and you just think to yourself, what is the game total going to be in Commanders Pats? Like,
it's going to be
that's going to be just a miserable experience for
the funny thing is, Washington, because they're such an inefficient offense, they're near the top in total rush attempts, pass attempts, total plays, but they're below average in total touchdowns. So it's going to be a lot of between the 20s action. And I think that's why you see Jahan Dotson's ADP rising, because you see there's going to be a lot of volume there and a lot of catches in PPR leagues for underneath receivers like Samuel, like Dotson. And Terry McLaurin is one of the great talents at wide receiver, who will forever be one of those what-if wide receivers. What if you had a quarterback at some point? So I think their offensive skill position players are fun. Antonio Gibson is fun, but they don't have the offensive line. That's the big difference. When it's Andrew Norwell and Charles Leno, Nick Gates, Samuel Cosme, Chris Paul, this is not what the Giants have. It's not what the Eagles have. It's not what the Cowboys have. Their defense isn't as good either. They have one of the least formidable secondaries. They got Kendall Fuller, Emmanuel Forbes, Derek Forrest. This is not a team, and especially a defense, that anyone is worried about, and it's just very difficult to see how they win 7 games.
The question, and baked into that number, is, do we get anything out of Sam Howell? Because we've seen similar guys with similar profiles that have made it work for a season or two. And the question is he something, or is he just another de facto nameless, faceless quarterback that is taking snaps for a franchise and therefore has some super flex value? Or is he capable of something more? Draft capital has a lot to do with that, obviously. Brock Purdy aside, it's very rare that you get late round quarterbacks that really splash and do things. They're going to give him a shot. And that's all you can really ask for the prices that Sam Howell is going for. It's very Desmond Ridder-ish, but I think he's even cheaper than Desmond Ridder at this point, because I think people have some idea of what Ridder can be. Howell is, if nothing else, has some tools, and he's going to have weapons. Like, the fact that he has mobility is going to help him, because he's going to be running for his life. That offensive line is not good.
Ron Rivera continues to talk about Jacoby Brissett.
Oh, God.
And I wonder why that is. I don't know. I don't know why.
Why?
I don't think he would be mentioning Jacoby Brissett's name as much if he were loving what he was seeing from Sam Howell. I think Sam Howell fell to the 5th round of the NFL draft, even though he has some speed, right? He runs a 4.7. The guy ran for almost 1,000 yards in his final year in college. I mean, look at this, 828 rushing yards at North Carolina.
That's not insignificant at all.
Yeah, and in his first year, it was really impressive. I mean, his best year was at North Carolina, where he looked like a first-round pick. We're like, okay, this guy's 38 touchdowns, 7 interceptions as a redshirt freshman. What?
Yeah.
Right? That's crazy. Yeah. And then he just regressed and regressed year over year. Why? I don't know. I think the weapons around him were worse. But there has been a glimmer of hope on his college resume, especially if you wind the clock back, that this kid can play. Yeah, and he can run around and he can make plays like Taylor Heineke did. Right? There's very much a Taylor Heineke meets Baker Mayfield vibe with Sam Howell, in a good way. In a I'm going to run around and make plays way, not Daniel Jones, Kenny Pickett level, but you could see he's a lesser than play, and certainly not Desmond Ridder. Desmond Ridder has real speed. Desmond Ridder's a real rushing quarterback, a bona fide. No, that's not Sam Howell. I don't think Sam Howell is going to be running the ball as much as Pickett and Jones, but he is going to be scrambling. There is sneaky super flex value with Howell and with Brissett, because over the course of the season, because the offensive line is below average, like what happened to Daniel Jones early in his career, he wasn't able to play a full season a lot of times. Right? And the coaches got frustrated and they just wanted to throw other bodies out there and see what happens. And that's what's going to happen. They're going to end up throwing Brissett out there at some point. So you're going to want to have both those guys on your Superflex 2 QB rosters as the season goes along at some point. But Howell is the guy that I would roster first. I think they need to see what he can do. I think they're going to open the season with him as the starter. He was impressive at the Senior Bowl. I think all these guys, Ridder, Pickett, Howell, were all similarly competent at the Senior Bowl, as opposed to this past year, which was the worst quarterback year. The year prior was a great year, because all these mid-round quarterback picks practiced the whole week at the Senior Bowl. So it was a great year to be there, especially for the wide receivers. It was a great gift to have good quarterbacks rotating through constantly. So I'm excited to see Sam Howell. I want to see what he can do. It's wide open for him. He does have one of the better wide receiver trios in the NFL.
Yeah.
And it's fun. They can win in all quadrants. You got Samuel close to the line of scrimmage. You got Dotson in the intermediate routes. You got McLaurin with that deep separation. And, Logan Thomas is back. Right, and Logan Thomas is athletic, and he's going to be, I think, fully healthy finally after a lost season. So we'll see what happens with the offense. There's sneaky volume here, but Otherwise, in the futures markets, I think I'm going under. I'm just going to keep pushing it down. They can't push the number low enough.
I think they're going to probably pop in a game or two where you can see what Howell might be if he could ever, instead of it being lightning in a bottle, if he could ever consistently do that stuff down to down. A lot of the love for Brock Purdy is he just did the stuff simply that Garoppolo didn't, which is you don't even have to complete deep balls, but you have to throw them. There has to be some vertical threat to your offense. And Garoppolo just wouldn't do it. It's not that they weren't there. It's not that he was misfiring on them. He just didn't do it. So there is some value here in terms of Washington's pass catchers, just in the fact that Sam Howell will let it go. This is not your, close to the line of scrimmage, we're going to run quick outs with, Amendola and Welker from the Pats from years ago. They will let a couple go a game. And when you have a deep ball tracker like McLaurin that really can get behind somebody and make those actually count, they're not just wasted air yards.
This is a good case for McLaurin. I love McLaurin. I'm always looking for an opportunity to draft McLaurin.
They're not wasted air yards when you have someone that can separate vertically like he can. There are some guys that just track a deep ball better than others, and Howell's willing to let it go. It's not necessarily that Terry's going to have the most efficient season that he's ever had, but especially in a format like best ball, he's going to have a couple weeks where Sam lets two deep ones go and he comes down with one or both of them. You could easily look at a game where he has 5 or 6 catches for 110, 120 yards and 2 scores. That's the kind of week that you need in a best ball format to make a wide receiver pick in that range valuable. He's going to have a couple of those this year. And all you have to do is hope that Howell keeps starting at quarterback as opposed to Brissett, because we know Jacoby. We know he's a very solid short to intermediate area quarterback. He just doesn't have he's not going to let 45-yard shots go 4 or 5 times a game in the way that Howell's going to try to. God bless him. If they work out, they work out. If they don't, they don't. But again, part of it is you just have to be willing to try that. And to this point, the quarterback in Washington has not.
No, I know. But McLaurin does have the air yards. I mean, every year he's putting up 1,300 plus air yards. He set a career high in receiving yards last year. He was great. McLaurin's underrated. He's a great pick in the 5th round. I love pushing the button on him in the 5th round. Just keep pushing, running back out, knowing you can get Rachaad White even later, Cam Akers even later. I prefer McLaurin in the 5th round to Dotson at the 7-8 turn.
I agree because Dotson is going to require a quarterback that feeds him targets. Whereas
he wasn't efficient last year. He had a couple wild plays with some yak, but he wasn't even a good yak player last year. Look at his yak per target on Player Profiler, middle of the receiver group of all qualified receivers. He's right there, middling efficiency stats across the board. So Jahan Dotson wasn't as dynamic as the narratives will tell it.
Yeah,
and McLaurin every year is more dynamic than most of the sports and fantasy narratives you hear.
The thing is, Terry runs a full route tree, which most receivers in round 5 and beyond that you're going to get aren't going to get targets on slants, on bubble screens, on goes, on deep posts, on corners. He's going to get targets from everywhere. Like there are very few receivers that you can get round 5 and beyond that are playing a true outside role that can run any route in the tree and beat almost any DB. Now, I'm not saying that I'd love Terry against, Jalen Ramseys of the world or Sauce Gardners of the world. There is some matchup dependence there, and that also has to do with quarterback. They're not going to throw to Terry against Sauce Gardner if Jacoby Brissett is your quarterback. It's just not going to happen.
There are a lot of Fantasy Mansion on Twitter. At Fantasy Mansion on Twitter, I often do boom and bust. I do a boom and bust tweet, and this is an easy one. I'm going to go boom. I'm going to type in boom, Terry McLaurin, and bust Jahan Dotson. Oh, that's gonna trigger people.
People are not going to be happy with you.
That's gonna trigger. That's gonna trigger. That's gonna trigger. And we can talk about the two most exciting teams in the NFC after this. Talk about Underdog Fantasy. Now, many of you have already signed up. Thousands have signed up from Player Profiler already over the years. Underdog has supported us since 2020. Much of what you see on Player Profiler is because of Underdog, because of their support. Get the Underdog app, plug in that promo code Underworld. I used to play Underdog just for the best ball drafts. I mean, the best ball drafts are amazing. These draft rooms fill so quickly, and you can win life-changing money. You want to take advantage of all the sleepers we talk about on this show? Well, what better place than in an Underdog draft room to do that? And I recommend taking your Underdog play to the next level by diving into their NFL pick'ems. It's important to correlate those NFL pick'ems. You can pick both the quarterbacks and the wide receivers to exceed expectations. Correlate them, and you can 5x your payout. Bada bing, bada boom. Underdog Fantasy, the promo code is Underworld. For an instant deposit match up to $100, Underdog is the truest friend of the Underworld. Cowboys, go.
What more do you want? I mean, this team is loaded everywhere. Last year, we talked about the Eagles as the team that found the holes that they wanted to address and plugged them. Dallas did the exact same thing. Find me a spot on this roster where you're like, we don't really love that player. Their wide receiver 3 is Michael Gallup. 3. It's a big difference. Brandon Cooks is there. We know what CeeDee Lamb is. Dak Prescott is one of the most consistent quarterbacks you will ever find. He's never going to get too hot or too cold. You're never going to get a terrible day, like a really god-awful day from him, or, a Mahomes day from him, but you know what he is. And that may be the most valuable quantity outside of having a super elite quarterback, is a guy that you know exactly what you're going to get from.
Oh, yeah. The
defense,
total pass TDs projected for the Dallas Cowboys this year, 32. That's near the top of the league because they're projected to run 1,087 plays. There's going to be a lot of plays run. The NFC East is going to be the highest scoring division in the NFC, and Dak Prescott is undervalued. I talked about him on the Mind of Mansion show, how I love the backdoor stack on Underdog. We just talked about Underdog. Loving the backdoor stack of Brandon Cooks, and you come right back to Dak Prescott with Brandon Cooks. That to me is just, they did the thing. They found, number 2 receiver, we're weak. Let's strengthen that, right? Tight end, we're weak, right? Dalton Schultz, back-to-back plays. He's not getting forward momentum to keep the clock running, and then they need to get out of bounds. Well, he doesn't drag his foot, right, on his way out of bounds. So it's like incomplete, right? So he was incompetent when they needed him most. So they said, you know what, we're just gonna turn the whole thing over. We're gonna bring in Schoonamaker. We're gonna roll out Jake Ferguson, whatever, right? We're throwing the ball to Lamb and Cooks. That's what we're doing. Lamb, Cooks, Pollard. It's consolidated. It's similar to the Chargers. Right? There's a lot of similarities between the Chargers and the Cowboys in that you've got Allen, Williams, Eckler, and Tony Pollard is this year's Austin Eckler. It just all makes sense. It all makes sense. So I love this passing game. I love stacking Pollard, Lamb, and Cooks because it's consolidated and because there's a lot of volume and there's going to be a lot of passing touchdowns. This is where you want to invest in fantasy football. The problem for the Cowboys is that their offensive line is fragile. They're still relying on the same guys they've been relying upon year over year. They're still relying on Tyron Smith and Zach Martin. And yes, they brought in some new players, Terrence Steele, Tyler Biadasz. Right. Thank you. Thank you for the help on that. And that's their Achilles heel. There's going to be injuries again on the offensive line. They don't have the depth that the Giants do, for example. And when you look at the schedule, when you understand this is a fragile offensive line, and then you look at the schedule makers did them no favors.
Yeah, that's
right. They did them no favors. So if you have a dark horse team like the Giants in the NFC East, well, they're playing dark horse teams, right? No, they didn't win the NFC East last year, but they were rewarded by playing the Detroit Lions because Detroit didn't win the NFC North, right? The same thing with the Carolina Panthers. Carolina Panthers didn't win the NFC South, but the Carolina Panthers are teed up to win the NFC South this year. We think they're a better team overall, front to back, top to bottom, than the New Orleans Saints. And on the schedule, the Cowboys just happen to have to play all of these. It was just very bad luck. When I go down this board, I'm like, the NFC North team they have to play is the Lions. That's brutal. Panthers, that's a brutal game. At Carolina is brutal. You don't want to be at Carolina. The one team that they know they can beat is at Arizona early in the season. And then the rest of it is just 49ers, Chargers, Eagles, Giants, Panthers, Seahawks, Eagles. It's
that's a really tough draw.
Yeah, and then they're at Buffalo, right? Then they're at Miami the next week. It's
that Cowboys schedule is impossibly brutal.
It's impossible.
It looks like an SEC West schedule. I mean, it's bad.
I don't like it. And for that reason, I can't go over 9.5 of their win total.
That's the right number.
That is the right number. It feels low, but I'm staying away from that. If anything,
I'm not
that is because they have a better roster than their win total suggests. It feels like an over, but actually, I think because of the fragility of their offensive line and because of the brutality of their schedule, I think if I had to pick, I would go under. But they're better than that. They're better than a 9.5 win team. So you just got to stay the hell away. You stay all the way away from this. There's not much I like in the futures market
regarding the Cowboys,
except Dak 16-1 to win MVP. That's an absolute fair. That's the same as Tua. That's the same as Trevor Lawrence. That's the same as Aaron Rodgers. I think Dak Prescott's just a better quarterback than those guys. So that's an interesting bet, but that's
about it.
The
thing is, the Cowboys are fully capable of winning the NFC. The problem is they're probably going to get so beat up through that schedule. They're not a team you want to see in the playoffs at all. If they get any kind of rest, that is not a team that you want to see in the playoffs. Like off their bye week, they're going to clobber somebody. Who do they play immediately after their bye week?
Coming out of their bye week, they play the Rams. They're going to clobber the Rams.
Oh, it's going to be bad.
Rams at home coming out of the bye week.
Ugly.
Yeah.
That game's going to get way out of hand.
I mean, 231 vacated carries, 1,600 plus vacated air yards. This is an interesting team, man, for fantasy football. I like it. I also think that if their defense does not get the turnover luck that they've gotten in recent history, which is likely, they're going to see a reversion to the mean with the turnovers. Their offensive line fragility is a known problem. If these things all play out the way we believe they will, and that they are beat up and bruised, and having to rope-a-dope during the season, that just means that they're going to have to throw more and more volume for Dak, more volume for Lamb, more volume for Cooks. It's funny to hear Mike McCarthy talk about how they need to run the ball when all their roster moves betray that notion. This is clearly a team that has decided they are going to be an up-tempo offense first franchise, which is the best way to win football games, is to turn up the pass volume. And they're doing that. Their pace of play has been top 5 in the NFL the last 2 seasons, and it's going to be again. The big problem that they have is that they just endured one of the worst drafts by an NFL team. They used their first round pick on an interior defensive tackle. They reached on a tight end they could have had in the fourth round in Luke Schoonemaker. They took an inside backer in round 3. So they've squandered all their day 1 and day 2 picks. They had a couple nice picks, later with Asim Richards and Eric Scott in round 5 and 6. These are like sleepers. They burned a pick on Deuce Vaughn, just lit it on fire because his dad's the running back coach. So I was embarrassed by their draft. Jalen Brooks, wide receiver, in the 7th round. Who the hell is that? Right? So where these other teams are doing all the right things in the draft, look at how the Eagles helped themselves in the NFL draft. Look at how the Giants, we talked about it, the Giants just going chalk picks, just going best available corner. We're going to go with a center from Minnesota. They're just going to do all the right things. The Cowboys had been drafting well until this past draft. They just whiffed. And so if you're already thin at some key positions, the fact that they didn't go all in on the offensive line, like with Schoonemaker, for example, why are you drafting a tight end? They should have gone offensive line there. Mazzie Smith, there was a great offensive line talent still on the board, late first round. They could have made some moves, and they failed. They just kind of let the draft come to them, and the guys they selected were the wrong positions at the wrong slot. Like, you don't burn a first-round pick on an interior defensive lineman. You just don't do it. And you don't draft a sleeper tight end in the late second round. That's not, no, man, no. So they drafted a bunch of guys that you would typically target on day 3, on day 1 and 2. And I think it's going to hurt them, man. They also weren't that active in free agency. It's going to bring in Ronald Jones. I mean, a dusty Stephon Gilmore. We'll see how it goes with Stephon Gilmore. I
still think there's something there.
I think there's something I thought that was a good signing. Brandon Cooks was a great signing.
I think so too.
So they had a couple good signings, but they lost a lot more guys than they signed. They're setting themselves up where a few injuries could really lay this team low.
Yeah, and the thing is, they're asking Dak to shoulder so much of the load. And the best teams in the league, which Dallas is among them, try to help their quarterbacks. Dallas is just putting more and more on him. And as much as I love Dak, he's not Pat. He's not Burrow. He's not Josh Allen. You can't ask him to do everything all the time to keep your offense on time and in rhythm. This just feels like a team that will probably finish 10-7, 9-8. That's going to put the scare of God in a really good team like the Niners or the Eagles or the Lions or maybe even the Seahawks in the playoffs, just because if their roster is together, like if they make it through the regular season relatively unscathed at important positions, this team is terrifying. Their schedule is just brutal, and they didn't do themselves any favors with the depth that they acquired in the draft this year to potentially help themselves if they do have the injuries that every team sustains. It's just a matter of luck where those injuries come from. And there are a couple of positions that they can afford to have injuries at, but there aren't a lot. So it's very similar to a couple of the Saints builds, a couple of the Vikings builds, a couple of the Rams builds, where really good team across the board, but very fragile at certain positions that you can't really afford to be super fragile at. So you're just praying to God on every snap. Okay, the tackles don't get hurt. The guards don't get hurt. Edge rushers don't get hurt. Neither of the corners get hurt. Everywhere else, team is solid. It's just, again, the difference between the Cowboys and the Eagles is at their peak, the Cowboys are competitive with the Eagles. But if you go down the roster, if the Eagles have significant injuries, they've still got dudes.
Oh, dude, let's talk about the Eagles. The Eagles are amazing. Like their draft was incredible. They moved around. They got Jalen Carter and Nolan Smith from Georgia, which is not possible. It's not possible. Arguably the two best defensive players in the draft. They got them. Crazy, which is just crazy. And then Sidney Brown, the safety. If you want to draft a safety, early third round is the best time to draft a safety. Perfect. Just perfect. Even I love Tyler Steen. Right? I love getting an Alabama 6'6", 320-pound offensive lineman who's probably going to move inside and play guard. I mean, you've got to love that, right? He was the number 5 ranked athlete in the offensive line class. Number 5 out of 39, right? So he's explosive, he's agile, especially given his size. How he fell to the third round, I don't know, but they were just like, chalk. That's what they did in the draft. And so their draft versus the Cowboys draft was an incredible juxtaposition in a team that aced it versus a team that blew it.
Yeah,
and they actually got better schedule luck, right? Because who do they play from the NFC South? Tampa Bay.
The North, they play the Vikings.
Yeah, the NFC North, they actually play the Vikings. So you could argue that they have the easier schedule than the Cowboys because they finished first instead of second.
And the fun part for them is they have O-line depth. They have D-line depth. There is depth at corner. They're not worried about stuff. The build of the Eagles is much less fragile than the build of the Cowboys. And so they don't have to ask Jalen Hurts to do what he did in the Super Bowl every week.
No.
To win games. They don't ask their quarterback to play Superman until he has to. That's what you want. You want a guy that's capable of putting on the cape when you need him, not a guy that has to do it every single week. And we saw this with Lawrence year 1 and Justin Fields last year. If you ask them too early to put on Superman's cape and try to carry your offense by themselves, they learn bad habits that take time to unlearn. Philly never asked Jalen to do any of that. They were like, dude, go out there. If you feel comfortable running the ball, run the ball in year 1 and 2. If you feel comfortable throwing certain routes, do it. We're not going to ask you to do anything that we don't think you can do. And now that he's developed into the kind of player that he is, where he can do everything, they still don't ask him to do everything, which is awesome. There's a solid run game. That offensive line is good. We know what A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith are. Dallas Goedert is a premium tight end in this league.
It's up and down the board, man. There's no holes. This team is a Super Bowl team. They're going to win the Super Bowl. They're going to start 8-0. Okay.
You think they're starting 8-0?
They're going to start 8-0. Look at the schedule. At the Patriots, Vikings, Buccaneers, Commanders, Rams, Jets, Miami at home, and then Commanders.
Miami's a sneaky one. Oh, that game's going to be awesome.
That's a home game, though. That's a home game, so it's a clear path to 8-0. And at that point, Jalen Hurts is going to be the favorite to win MVP. So my favorite futures bet by far for the Eagles, because I'm taking the Eagles at 3-1 to be the NFC champion, is just not good value.
No,
minus 115 to win the NFC East. That's not good value. The only good value on the board is Hurts 12-1. 12-1, where Herbert, Allen, Burrow, Mahomes, their odds are all lower. The payouts, on Mahomes in particular, is half of the payout on Hurts. Hurts is 12-1. Mahomes is 6-1.
Did everybody forget that had he not gotten Hurts last year, he would have won it? Did everybody?
Right. And Mahomes won it last year. He can't win it this year, or he's very unlikely to win it this year. So those should be flipped. Like, just the difficulty in winning back-to-back MVPs. Would you think Mahomes' odds would be at least below Burrow?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, more in line with Hurts, but they're not. Hurts is literally twice the payout. It's crazy.
If we again run the exact same test that we've been running this entire time that we've done this show. If we simulate the NFL season 12 times, does Jalen Hurts win MVP more than once? Yes.
Of course.
Yes.
Of course. Run the Sims. Run this. This is nuts to me. That this is where we would end up. Like, this is the clear-cut best bet, right? I love the value. Again, the value bet on the Giants to win the NFC is great. Right? But in terms of like the bet that's in the center of the Venn diagram of like value and probabilities, it's like, give me this freaking Hurts 12-1 to win MVP. Oh my God. Because the team, man, it's not necessarily about him. It's the team. It's the schedule. The schedule. Now, it gets brutal. After they play the Commanders, it's the Cowboys, Chiefs, Bills, 49ers, Cowboys. All right, but then they finish Giants, Cardinals, Giants. So they had this zone in the middle of their schedule, which is just an impossible gauntlet. But they're the Eagles. And they have the depth, and they have the explosive playmakers. They've got everything. They're bringing in Hassan Reddick. What a great signing that was from Arizona. They're bringing over Darius Slade. That was a great signing. James Bradbury from the Giants. You up and down the board, and then they inject all this talent. Oh, my. Jalen Carter. Yeah, okay. Yeah, it must be nice to be able to bring that guy in. Nolan Smith must be nice. Tyler Steen must be nice. Must be nice. Then they're bringing in Terrell Edmonds, a quality safety, and Justin Evans. So they invested in the safety position in the draft and in free agency, which they knew was a known weakness. And they're taking these corners that were first-round corners off the scrap heap. They did it again this year with Greedy Williams.
Here's the other one that I think at some point needs to be discussed. MVP narrative award. We know that. And that's why we don't think they're going to give it to Mahomes again. I mean, it's not that he doesn't deserve it. We just don't think that it's likely that they give it to him again. It's very rare that anybody goes back-to-back. Here's the fun part. They're going to get a game against Kansas City.
Ooh.
And if the Eagles win that game, the narrative is going to be Jalen has climbed the mountain that he didn't climb last year, as opposed to the Eagles beat the Chiefs.
That's week 11. Week 11 on the NFL schedule. Week 11, Philadelphia is at Kansas City.
And if they win that game, you can lock it up. You can just walk on down there and hand him the trophy right now, because we're hearing, this is not breaking news by any means. It's made its rounds the last 24 hours. Jamar Chase wants Burrow to sit out a couple weeks. We know what Josh Allen is lacking at wide receiver too. The numbers may not be there, even though the production is in terms of wins and losses.
The Bills are leaking talent. The Bills are on the backside of their window.
So it may come down to, very simply, Jalen versus Pat. And in that battle of Jalen versus Pat, do I think it's twice as likely that the Chiefs beat the Eagles? Because whoever wins that game, there's going to be a whole lot of stories written about it. And again, the MVP award is an AP award that's given out. There are people that vote on it. And the people that vote on it are writing columns every single week about what happens in the NFL. Every single eyeball that covers football will be on that game, Eagles at Chiefs, in prime time. No question. And whatever team wins that out, there's going to be some epic game that's played. I hope it's as good as we think it can be. But whoever wins that game is going to be the front runner to win MVP at that point. And if you're giving me double the odds on one over the other, that's one of the best bets you'll see all year.
Hey, I want to take a moment to thank you for tuning in. It's important to me that all of our media be free. This is only possible because of you allowing a true independent sports media enterprise to thrive unlike any other in the business. So please subscribe to the All In Package to continue to make all of this possible, to ensure that all of our stats, information, data, content is available to you, especially you, the people that get the site and get the show.